Okay, now I'm going to show you how to measure and use this score cutter to make some of our wall cuts on the tile. Keep in mind that you will need a wet saw for certain cuts. Anything that's a 90-degree angle or angles in the room, you will have to have a wet saw. It's not imperative that you have both. I do because this is so much easier than a wet saw to make all of those large straight cuts. But you can use just a wet saw to do all your cuts. My wet saw is a professional grade. It's probably an $800 or $900 saw. However, I do know, and I've used some of the lesser expensive saws from places like Lowe's and Home Depot, and they're actually pretty good. You can get a decent little wet saw for $100 at Lowe's or Home Depot that'll do the job, and if you're just installing tile in your own home for yourself, it would probably last years and years. So let me show you how we make this cut and how we do some measuring. One of the things first to talk about is when you're opening your boxes of tile, you're always going to have tile that are broken. It's not that big a deal as long as you don't have so many broken that you don't have enough whole ones to do the field tile. I always set my broken ones aside and try to use them up for my cuts. If you have a significant number or whole boxes of tiles that are broken, most any place you purchased them will take them back and give you a credit. First thing we want to do, we're going to take our tile that we want to cut and we're going to set it directly over top of the tile behind the space that we want to cut. Next, we take a whole tile and simply lay that tile down on top of it, put it against the wall, and then I like to pull it back, in this case a good ½ of an inch, because I've got a grout joint on one side and I need a space against the wall. The reason I do it this way is because the walls are not always straight, and you want to keep the tile kind of tight to the wall so that you don't need to use something large as a shoe molding or a base molding to have to cover up these large ugly gaps in the tile. So I simply just strike it with a pencil line. Then I'm going to take my tile, put it in my tile cutter here. I line it up right on, there's a line on the cutter that tells you exactly where it's going to make the cut. Line it up on there. Set the cutting wheel down onto the tile and simply run it across the tile. Get a little snap and our tile's cut. So we put that there. We'll continue doing that until we run out of tile that can be cut with the tile cutter. Then we'll get out the wet saw and cut those. Okay, we're moving along, putting our cut tile down. Now I want to show you a couple of tricky cuts. You'll notice this one right here is going to be something like a 45-degree angled cut. Best way to handle this kind of cut is simply to take measurements with a tape measure. Don't forget to allow for your grout joint spacing. In this case it's 1/4 of an inch. So what I've done here is just calculated how long down the tile I need to be. Got my tile sitting here. I transfer my measurements to here, allowing for my 1/4 inch, make a mark. I know how long my tile is, 11 5/8. I simply come up this way to see where that would fit, make a mark, take my measurements. Some of these measurements are a little tricky to get into. You kind of guesstimate as best you can. You can cut the tile a little big. It's always best You can then go back and cut it a little more if you need to. Transfer my measurements to my tile, and then I just strike a line between them. I'll make that cut on the wet saw, and we'll be ready to go. Now when you're doing an L cut, what I like to do, as I showed you before, put the tile directly over top of the one behind it. Using another whole tile, lay it down. Don't forget your grout joints. Allow yourself that 1/2 inch, which is a 1/4 inch on either side, and strike your line. To get your other leg of the L, you simply move the tile over to the other tile, then put your whole tile down over top of it, allow for your grout joints, strike your line. Not that complicated. And then of course that'll be cut on the wet saw. Okay, over here things start to get a little trickier with our tile. As you can see, we've already cut a couple of the tiles around our toilet flange. I'm getting ready to cut the back one, and I'll show you how we handle that. I've cut this tile to the appropriate length here because it's shorter than a whole tile would be. I simply just place the tile spaced accordingly over top of the flange, and with my pencil I just simply make the marks where it's hitting the edge of my toilet flange. Now what I do, this is a pretty short cut here, so I can probably freehand this cut. But I always keep a toilet flange handy, or a spacer handy, which we'll need later for installing the new toilet, so that I can use that as a template to make a nice round circle around the tiles here. I'll show you how we're going to make that kind of a cut when we go outside to the wet saw. This next cut's going to be particularly tricky because not only do we have the flange to go around, we've also got to go around the water line. And in this application, because I have the plumbing parts, I've chosen to, I'm going to shut the water off completely. We're going to cut this all off. That will allow me to put a hole through my tile and set it over top of the water line. What you can do if you don't have the ability to cut a hole with a hole saw for tile is you can just simply take measurements, and then you cut a notch in the tile and then replace the piece when you're finished. So by taking this measurement, I know that the front edge of my pipe is about 6 inches off my tile. So I simply make a mark here. Take all of your measurements and transcribe them. From the tile to the new tile. I can also calculate from here that to the front edge of my pipe is 11 3/8. I go over here to 11 3/8 and make a mark. And now I know that from the edge of my tile I'm going to be 5 7/8. So now that I've located where my hole will be, I will simply use a masonry bit to drill a hole through there. I will start with a small bit and work my way up to a 1/2 inch or 3/4 to be enough to go around that pipe. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those so we can finish this thing up.